Well, hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the breaking news coming out of the Middle East, and this is regarding the Houthis apparently, for the first time since the Iran war has begun, initiating strikes targeted at Israel. So without further ado, let's get into it. There's an article in the BBC that has come out, and this news is doing the rounds currently because it's breaking news surrounding the fact that the Houthis have launched their first ever strike against Israel, or their first ever strike in this current Iran, United States, America, Israel conflict. And the article is Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis launch missile at Israel for first time since war began. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis launch a missile strike on Israel for the first time since the war began. The Houthis entered the conflict. The Iran-backed rebel group launched a missile strike on Israel from Yemen a day after they warned of intervention if attacks on Iran continued. Israel said it intercepted the missile.
And a spokesman for Yemen's Houthis is speaking from Sana'a. We'll listen in.
Of the Yemeni armed forces regarding the immediate intervention in support of the Islamic Republic of Iran and to the resistance fronts in Lebanon, Iraq, and Palestine, and within the current situation of the escalation and the ongoing attacks against our brothers in Lebanon and Iran and Iraq and Palestine, the Yemeni armed forces, with the help and grace of Allah Almighty, has done its first military attacks with a barrage of ballistic missiles against military-sensitive attacks in Israel in the south of the occupied Palestine. This operation coincides with the heroic operations by the Mujahideen in Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The operation has achieved all the goals with the help of Allah Almighty. Our operations will continue till we achieve all the announced and declared objectives. The former statement of the Yemeni armed forces until the aggression against all the fronts of resistance will stop. Allah is our supporter, and Allah is the grace, and with the help of Allah we will live. Long live Yemen, independent. Victory will be for Yemen and the free people of our nation. Sana'a, Yemen, the 28th of March 2026.
Who are the Houthis? The Houthis are an armed political and religious group which champions Yemen's Shia Muslim minority, the Zaydis. They are controlled much out of northwest Yemen since 2014, when they ousted the internationally recognized government from the capital Sana'a. The intervention of the Houthis now raises the prospect of an expanded war, writes our Middle East bureau chief in Jerusalem. So you've got, I remember doing some videos when the Iran war began, and looking at it, Hamas had not got directly involved, and neither did the Houthis. Now, I suspected that there was a deal being done behind closed doors between probably the Americans, the Houthis, and the Saudis and UAE. I still believe that the Houthis, even if they do get involved, it's going to be something really marginal. And the reason I say this is because, firstly, if you look at it, the Houthis being activated now, hypothetically activated now by the Iranian regime, means that the Iranians wish to intensify. Now, if the Iranians wish to intensify, the possible reason for this is because they're being severely tested, and they're now drawing on all resources to come to their aid. But at the same time, the Iranians are not doing themselves any favors by isolating themselves on the world stage by targeting the Strait of Hormuz, by targeting the Gulf Arab nations, and targeting the ships that belong to other countries as they enter and exit the Strait of Hormuz. Because all this does is it then antagonizes the rest of the world towards Iran. Because countries that have absolutely no leaning in this war suddenly find that they're being hit economically. Those governments then are placed at the mercy of their populace, and they run the risk of being toppled. And it then creates instability, and this has widening ramifications. Now, in instances like this, even sympathizers of the Iranian regime or of the Iranians will then come in and say that it's not worth our survival being sacrificed for our support for the Iranians. And that is what will then turn the wider political opinion against the Iranians. So while the Iranians, some might argue the Iranians are winning militarily because all they need to do is to survive, I'll tell you, they are isolating themselves politically. And you know that wars generally end through political negotiation, especially in a war like this where, there's so much of propaganda coming out on both sides. It's almost impossible to ascertain the actual stories or the actual truth on the ground. Political intervention at some point is going to have to take place, and this is where I suspect that the Iranians are going to be woefully lacking, because they are continuing to isolate themselves. And you also have to look at it, the Houthis, if they go in full force into this Iran conflict, they then run the risk of decapitating themselves, basically, because they then become less effective at having to fight their cause and dedicate 100% of their effort towards their cause. So I think that the introduction of the Houthis may be purely symbolic. Alternatively, it could also be that the Iranians are now looking to, ramp things up because of the pressure they're feeling. However, at the same time, they're beginning to isolate themselves politically. And as time drags on, you're going to have war apathy. Now, I suspect the Iranians feel that if they can drag this war on, it's going to affect Western governments and, the Americans and the Israelis. And to a large extent, that might be true. But the longer this war drags on and countries that are not directly involved in this war become adversely affected because of Iranian policies within the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranians run the risk of becoming a pariah. And once that happens, global policy towards Iran will shift, where Iran will then find that it is on the receiving end of what the wider world at large has to offer. Because somebody hurting in a part of the world where the Iran conflict has absolutely nothing to do with them or their government, and where they've been sitting idly by condemning what has happened to Iran, suddenly find that they're having to pay the price for it. I'll tell you, everybody loves moral virtue signaling. But when it starts affecting their pocket, that is when things begin to change. And you see that happening with Ukraine. You see that happening with Ukraine, where at the beginning everybody was, putting these pins on their lapels and Instagram handles, and, everybody was Ukrainian, and, you couldn't do enough until the truth started seeping out about the corruption, the theft, Zelensky, and, the number of deaths. And then when it began hitting people's pockets in other parts of the world, you find that there's now an apathy towards this Ukrainian issue. And you find it happening within the United States as well, one of the ardent supporters of the Ukraine war. When Biden exited and Trump entered and the narrative began to shift, you find that most Americans can't be bothered anymore, because their domestic policy is what concerns them. And that is what happens for a large part throughout the world. Once something happening in another part of the world becomes a problem to your domestic life, once it affects your domestic life, once you have to work harder and longer just to maintain a lifestyle or just to put food on your table, you then start questioning, why is it that you really need to support that war in a foreign land of which you have absolutely no dealing with? So again, while this may be the first lot of missiles launched by the Houthis, and while there may be some signaling, I don't think that it's going to turn out into a full-blown attack by the Houthis in defense of the Iranian regime. I think for the large part, the Iranian regime, with the exception of Hezbollah, is on their own. I think they've been abandoned by the Chinese, abandoned by the Russians. The Houthis are just putting in some sort of token response. The Hamas has already come out and just given some strong words of condemnation, but done nothing else. So short of Hezbollah, I don't think there's anybody else. And as I mentioned before, had the Iranians not let down Bashar's regime, they would have probably had a very staunch ally in Syria, but that's gone as well. So we're keeping a close eye on this, and we'll update you accordingly. I want to thank you for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And please remember to like, share, and most of all subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.